of different scholarly articles and journals speaking about the relationships between men and women in friendships and various kinds of relationships. Let's look at our research questions. Our first research question was, what are the differences in maintaining a same-sex friendship versus a cross-sex friendship? Our second research question is, how does communication between cross-sex friendships differ from same-sex friendships?
For our methodology, we have participants, procedures, and data analysis. For our participants, we interviewed those who were between the ages of 18 to 23, had experience in cross-sex friendships, and attended the same mid-sized East Coast university. Through the recruitment process, we got our participants through snowballing, word of mouth, and social media. For our procedures, we created 12 interviews at an average length of 7 minutes. The data was then transcribed on otter.ai, and those transcriptions are held on a password-protected laptop. Throughout our data analysis, we uncovered several themes throughout our research: perception, commonality, individual ideology, and patterns of communication behaviors.
Let's look at a few of our results. The first result we found was perception. We define perception as the way an individual defines meaning based on the exchanges they've had with their friends. A good example of this would be the quote from one of our subjects that said, "I think women are a lot easier to talk to just in general. I feel like they're more empathetic, more understanding than men in my experience." Our second theme we found was commonality, which was in reference to the things that men and women find common together that creates the friendship. That sets the foundations for the friendship. A good example of this would be our quote that we have that says, "I can say common interest is another big one. I have a lot of friends, and we share a lot of the same interests."
Our other two themes are individual ideology and patterns in communication behavior. Individual ideology is defined as the background of individuals' morals and beliefs and how those play a role in their cross-sex friendships. A good example of this is, a lot of people say that guys and girls cannot be friends, which I don't think is true. In patterns of communication behavior, we define this as to how individuals communicate with each other within the cross-sex friendship. An example of this is, I feel like nonverbal cues are a lot easier with someone of the same sex.
Let's look at our results. So the first answer we found to our research question is, in order to maintain a cross-sex friendship, there must be a significant and constant amount of adaptations made, especially when new variables such as romantic partners get involved. This means that to maintain a cross-sex friendship, there must be a bit of change that must happen throughout the variation of your friendship. Our second answer that we found was, the biggest difference found is the level of comfortability and the topics shared between the friends of the same sex as opposed to the opposite. This means that there are some topics and issues that one may share with a member of the same sex that are not so comfortable sharing with members of the opposite.
For our discussion, we found a few benefits and drawbacks within our research. One of those benefits was emotional support, where a few of our participants stated that they felt like they had an easier time finding emotional support within their female friends versus their male friends. We also found freedom to self. Freedom to self is what our participants described as being able to be truly themselves with their male friends, whereas they felt like with their female friends, they were being more judged. However, within cross-sex friendships, a lot of factors are at play, such as different beliefs and backgrounds, individual ideology, and how these individuals go about creating and forming their cross-sex friendships.
Let's talk about some of our limitations. Some of the limitations that we found when doing our research are age, access, and location. By age, we found that when we did our research, we only interviewed a small portion of the large amount of the population that we have in our city. For access, we only were able to interview students who were at the same university. And for location, we only interview people who lived in the same relative area.
For our future research, we have background, age, and LGBTQ+. For background, we think it would be nice to interview those who are different backgrounds, different moral beliefs, and different backgrounds to gain different points of views and perspectives. For age, we only interviewed those between the ages of 18 to 23. So interviewing others of different age brackets would give you bigger points of view on the topic. For LGBTQ+, we think it would be interesting to analyze the perceptions of LGBTQ+ members and how their view cross-sex friendships.
Thank you so much for listening to our research.
Hi everyone, my name is Carlyn Lee, and this is my research partner,
Nick Moore.
For our final research project, we decided to take a look at team fandom and mood. What exactly is this? So we decided to look at the effects of watching sports and college-age individuals' moods. The research gap we were aiming to fill was if there was a relationship between watching your favorite sports teams and how it affected your mood based on the outcomes. For our research, we decided to use the cognitive dissonance theory to back it up, which Nick will talk about in just a moment. Our two main hypotheses were if college-age individuals with a team fandom of over 5 years will have their moods more impacted by wins and losses in a game. And our H2 was if people who bet money are more likely to be tied to the outcomes.
Cognitive dissonance is experienced when an individual is doing something they're not familiar with. Individuals experience this in different levels of severity depending on the situation and who's around them. And this relates to team fandom and mood because individuals can feel differently when viewing their own team.
As far as methodology goes, we'll be going over procedures, participants, and results. For procedures, we used a survey using the Qualtrics website. It was 11 questions, all Likert type scale questions, and it took roughly 1 minute to take. As far as participants went, we had 96 total participants after clearing through the data to make sure all participants qualified to take the survey. For demographics, we had 51% of participants identify as male, 47% as female, and 1% as non-binary. Again, this was all for college-age individuals, so all participants were between the ages of 18 and 24. For results, we found our H1 was not significant, our H2 was significant, and our HPOC we decided was not significant. For this, we looked at if males were more likely to have their moods impacted compared to females based on the outcomes of games. While there was some evidence to support this, there was not enough for the data to be significant.
Our construct started with team fandom, and we measured the length that individuals were fans of their favorite teams. So we measured how many were fans of it for less than 1 year. That was 7 participants. 1 to 2 years, also 7 participants. 3 to 5 years was 14 participants. And then our biggest by a large margin was over 5 years with 69 participants. For sports betting, we measured how often people play sports bets. As far as our research went, we found that 70% of our participants did not sports bet at all, and only 7% bet more than 75% of the month.
For our third construct, we looked at mood. This is one of our bigger constructs throughout this study. For this, we decided to see if following the outcome of a game, how our participants' moods affected. And with this, we saw that participants were more likely to be affected if they watched the entirety of the match rather than just checking a score at the end. In our fourth construct, we looked at media consumption. With this, we wanted to see if watching live and in person compared to live on a streaming service had an effect on people's moods. And while previous research done in the past has shown that some people are more affected when they watch in person, with our specific demographic, we found that there was no correlation between the two. And now we're going to look at some limitations to our research.
As far as limitations went, we weren't able to promote consistently via social media and our own private group chats. Our second was aiming for a smaller sample size. In the future, we'd really like to have a larger sample size to be more indicative of the greater whole of Longwood and the rest of college-age individuals. And then our third was not making gender a construct. In the future, we'd really love to see the difference of wins and losses on different genders in the college-age individuals.
And for future research, we decided to not limit the age range to get a larger sample size and have some more representative data to fully capture what we were trying to research here. Idea 2, we were going to see if people were diehard fans compared to casual viewers to see if that had more of an impact on their mood based on the outcomes. And for our third idea, we were going to see if results differ in other countries. While we just really looked at the United States for our study, we did have some people put their favorite sports teams as international teams, and so we would look more somewhere in like the UK where they really like soccer, so we would focus on that to see if their moods had an impact based on the outcomes. And now Nick is going to finish us off here with a few things that we found in our research.
One of our major things is that we saw the length of team fandom did not significantly impact our participants' mood, whether their team won or lost. Another thing that we found was only 11% of respondents agreed they felt pressured to sports bet if people around them were. Thank you very much for tuning in to our research presentation. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Savana Mullen, and in an age of polarization and political discourse and continuous political and social movements occurring worldwide, I wanted to focus my research on something related to these movements and discover what drives people to truly act upon their beliefs. Many people engage in political discourse online, but their actions and involvement seem to end there. However, boycotting has become popularized online in the past few months, so I wanted to measure how political interactions on social media affect physical, political, or social actions. In this case, I chose boycotting. Through my research, I noticed that not many researchers compare digital actions to the physical commercial acts one does in political movements, leaving a gap in research that has yet to be studied until now. The theories I implemented in my study were nudge theory, a theory that claims that indirect suggestions or reinforcement influence the decisions and behaviors of others, and the selectivism hypothesis, which theorizes that if citizens use social media to engage in political conversations, then the conversations become fleeting and vapid, essentially meaningless. My hypotheses divide social media activity into political conversations and exposure to political spaces to compare how exposure and interaction affect boycotting movements individually, leading to these hypotheses. To measure these hypotheses, I used a mixed method survey with 16 total questions, 5 of them being open-ended and the rest being a variety of multiple choice questions. My questions targeted direct activity with political spaces on social media in multiple ways, including viewing, liking, reposting, and commenting as forms of interaction. My open-ended questions directly target motivations for boycotting and political motivations in general, which can be seen in the sample questions here. Due to the number of open-ended questions, my target sample size was 75 and ended up being 74 total participants. Many of these participants were Caucasian and between the ages of 20 to 21 years old. As a result, 2 out of my 3 hypotheses were not significant, while only 1 showed significance, which was my second hypothesis. My first construct, the filter bubble effect, is an algorithmic isolation from outside perspectives based on online activity and searches. Throughout the survey, I noted that some people actively avoided political content on social media, which makes them less motivated to politically participate. One specific participant noted that they avoided politics for their mental health, and avoidance of politics was a recurring theme in my data. This essentially shuts these participants out from political content and makes them less aware of current events and injustices in the world. My second construct is consumer activism, which is a collective action from consumers to influence the policies or actions of businesses or governments. There were varying opinions and beliefs on the act of consumer activism, with a polarizing split between those who fully support the action and participate, and those who believe that boycotting and other forms of activism affect nothing. Therefore, there is no motivation to do anything. This makes physical actions in political movements less efficient and motivates less people to continue to act as movements continue. My third construct is the spillover effect, which is a phenomenon in which an event in another country affects the economy of other countries. This construct was highlighted in the motivations for boycotting, which was my dependent variable for both my hypotheses, when several people mentioned the genocide in Gaza as a key motivation for boycotting, proving that the spillover effect has some theoretical hold over political beliefs and actions. My fourth construct is moral framing, which is the use of language that signals a call to action in listeners and readers. The effects of moral framing were more prevalent in those who were repeatedly exposed to political content, with their language being more adamant and passionate about the cause compared to those who were less frequently viewing political content online. This solidifies the important role of moral framing in political movements as a tactic to mobilize protesters. Now we get to my limitations in my design. My first limitation was the design of my research instrument itself. Due to the large amount of open-ended questions on my survey, respondents expressed survey burnout and were significantly unresponsive on multiple open-ended questions. My variable reliability was also inconsistent, with most being acceptable, while others were poor on the Cronbach Alpha scale. My sample size was a final limitation that could have skewed my results. My initial methods of promotion were ineffective, leading to a smaller sample size that may not be fully representative of the overall demographics, which goes into my recommendations for future research. For future research on this topic, I recommend a better mixed method design that includes a survey and a post-test interview for more accurate and specific data. I also recommend a more expansive sample so that more representative results can be acquired. My final recommendation for research is that it should include more targeted questions relating to specific companies and brands that are currently on the hot seat on social media platforms, so that research on the topic can not only be specific, but timely for current events, and also target preferential boycotting questions. Overall, although newer generations are becoming more politically involved and aware of social issues across the world, political apathy is still a prevalent issue in society that leads to burnout and lower participation in physical political actions. And although social media can be informative, it is still not a fully fleshed out driving force for political movements. So while actions and discussions are expansive and productive online, there is no progression with these movements in physical spaces. So, before you fully invest your energy into social media activism, there may be better ways to become politically involved that make a difference. Thank you.
Well, welcome back after lunch here. We've had some great research presentations to start off, and we actually have a veteran joining us, Quinn Urban, who presented last year in the studio. So how was your presentation last year, and how maybe did it differ from this live event this year?
Yeah, so last year, it was still very live, and it was very nerve-wracking, I think, just because you're in front of different cameras and your whole class is there. But this offers a little bit more of a unique experience where you're with peers all day. You have all the busy activities you can be doing instead of just sitting in the conference room. But I think this year's kind of a little bit more engaging, a little bit more lively than last year's was. It was a little bit more dead, but I think it's going to turn out to be a really good day so far.
Awesome, and you get to present some research later on here on a different topic. But of course, what did you research last year for this class, and where did that research take you?
Yeah, so I ended up submitting my research out to the Western States Communication Association conference, and I went and presented my research there. My co-author Cole Pillow and I ended up getting a top student award, which was really, really cool. So we got that really cool award. We're the only person from Longwood, let alone Virginia there. So it was really fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks for stopping by, Quinn. Back to more research presentations coming up. Brittany is right around the corner.
Hello, my name is Brittany Washington. I'm here to talk to you today about the perceptions of AI. Oops, okay. So for this research topic, people have perception. For this research topic, I'm here to talk to you all about the perceptions of AI within social media. So my theory was cultivation theory, which I have a definition from the Theory website, which is the communication and framework in which a long-term exposure to media is presented. And for the AI definition, it was found on the scientific research website in my paper. And that is when computer systems of a set of algorithms is presented. So for my research topic, the hypothesis that I focused mainly on was women and men's perception of AI, whether or not women would view AI better than men, and people's social media presence and their use of AI in social media. Moving on for the methodology, my survey was posted in Qualtext, and I had about 18 to 30 questions, and within a 3 to 5 minute time frame. I had 104 participants take my survey, and on average, I had mainly 20 to 18-year-olds participate in completing the survey. Out of the 30, it was majority female because it was held at Longwood University, which brings out more females than male. For my results, I found that all my hypotheses were non-significant, and that could be due because we were only had a certain time frame to complete the survey and have it done by. So for social media, I mainly focus on asking multiple questions that my participants would use for social media use. So like, for example, I asked them how many hours do they typically spend on social media, and they would tell me their answers and stuff around that range. Then I focused on social media platforms. So for my survey in particularly, I only used one social media platform, which was Instagram, and my participants had to identify whether or not their AI images was from Instagram or was from another social media platform. For AI-generated content, I received all the data and images from Instagram instead of any other social media content. So it was a little teaser for them. And I expected that gender would play a big impact when it came to social media in general, but it really didn't. That was kind of fascinating. Yeah. So moving on, so for some limitations, I really wanted to see if I could do videos within my survey, but Qualtext had a little error in it, so I wasn't able to do videos. So that was one of my limitations. Another limitation was I only use Instagram for this project in general, and I want to use more platforms, but it was a better focus for me for Instagram, so I wish I used more. And then lastly, we only allowed 18-year-olds and more to take this survey. I think that if we had a younger audience, it would be a lot more better. So for future research, having a survey taken within a longer time frame for 1 to 2 months would be very beneficial to see over time the use of AI and whether or not social media and AI grows. And then also, I only had male, females, and non-binary students take this survey. So what if I had all gender people take my survey? Would that raise the perceptions of AI? And then lastly, what if we focus more on a younger audience? So people in high school, middle school, what if they were to take my survey? Would AI use be seen more for them? So for 2 takeaways that I have, for the takeaway 1, social media keeps growing and changing every day, and it's hard to identify AI in social media use. That's what I received from this survey that I've taken. And my last takeaway is AI is fairly new. So a lot of participants weren't really able to identify AI content as I would like them to, but hopefully in the future this could all change. Thank you so much, Brittany, Washington.
Hi, thank you for tuning in. My name is Nicole Dubec.
And I'm Kaylee Ramsey. Today we will be presenting our communication research project on reality dating television shows' impact on people's levels of self-esteem and dating behaviors. We chose to research this topic as reality television viewers ourselves to learn more about these shows' potential impacts on their viewers.
We are trying to fill the gap on minimal research done regarding reality dating shows and how it affects young adult self-esteem.
The theory we chose to apply to this construct was cultivation theory, which implies that long-term media exposure has effects on viewers' perception of the real world. This definition came from George Gerbner.
Our first hypothesis is young adults who watch reality dating shows are more likely to have lower self-esteem than those who do not watch them. Our second hypothesis is young adults who watch reality dating shows are more likely to have unrealistic ideas of sexual behavior than those who do not. We conducted a 2-minute survey with 11 questions that reached 101 participants, ages 18 through 24. 87% were women, 13% were men, and 1% were non-binary.
Again, our first hypothesis predicted young adults who watch reality television dating shows are more likely to have lower levels of self-esteem than those who do not. The results of our independent t-test sample were approaching significance. However, the difference was not statistically significant enough to support that hypothesis. Our second hypothesis predicted that young adults who watch reality dating shows are more likely to have unrealistic ideals of sexual behaviors and dating behaviors than those who do not watch them. The results of our test again were approaching significance, however, they were not statistically significant enough to support this hypothesis either.
Our 4 constructs were self-esteem, sexual behavior, age, and gender. For self-esteem, it was not supported because the people who watched reality dating shows had lower self-esteem than those who did not. Data evidence showed more people agreed to the question, do reality dating shows affect your self-esteem? Sexual behavior was supported because people who watch reality dating shows had more unrealistic expectations on sexual behavior. 40% of open-ended questions mentioned that reality dating shows create unrealistic expectations.
We chose to examine the construct of age as young adults are more in tune with reality dating shows than older generations. However, we were hoping to compare young adults to middle-aged adults, but it turned out that age did not play the significant role in our study that we originally had thought. Our data evidence showed out of ages 18 to 24, 22 was the most common age of those who took our survey. The construct of gender was supported as it showed women are more likely to be impacted by the ideals displayed on reality television dating shows than men. Our data evidence showed that women agreed dating shows make them feel negatively when answering the question, how do reality dating television shows make you feel about your own body?
Sorry. Do you want to go? We had 3 themes for our results. We had an open-ended question and we had 3 themes.
The first theme was answered as reality dating shows have no impact on viewers' reality dating in real life. The second theme was that they portray toxic or negative views and are reinforced in the shows. The third theme was that they create unrealistic expectations or ideals of relationships.
Some limitations that were found in our research were we did not have a large enough sample size to determine the real impact of data collected. We did not find enough men to take the survey because men typically do not watch reality dating shows. We needed more of a demographic variety to take the survey.
When it comes to future research, we would like to aim to survey more variety of ages to compare mature generations to young adults. We would also like to ask more of a variety of genders to participate in the survey in order to gain the male's perspective on this data. And finally, we would like to ask more open-ended questions to gain deeper insight into people's opinions on these constructs.
In conclusion, here are some key takeaways that we collected. Our research further supported ideas of cultivation theory that media shapes how viewers perceive the world. Our research also supports that media portrays unrealistic ideals that impact female viewers negatively. Although our prediction on media's impact on young adults' self-esteem was not found to be significant, it was still found to be somewhat supported in our own research. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate Frey,
And I'm Colin Gilbert.
and our research was about how media representation affects queer relationships between college-age students.
Our research topic was how would media representation affect the development of queer relationships for college-age students and their ability to start and maintain these relationships as well. So the research area that we decided to study was the gap between sexuality and media representation and the development of emotional intelligence and romantic maturity. You can see our first hypothesis at the very bottom. We also had a second hypothesis that was that queer college-age students would have a more difficult time developing and maintaining their relationships at a college age. And the theory that we decided to use for this project was cultivation theory. Cultivation theory essentially states that as people see messages repeated in the media that they consume, they will be inclined to reflect that, like the social norms that they see in media.
So to conduct this research, we sent out a survey using Qualtrics. It took each respondent about 2.5 minutes to complete the entire survey. Some questions we asked included questions about media consumption, such as how many queer relationships people see in the media, as well as how many heterosexual relationships they see. We also asked some questions to gauge their own experience with romantic relationships within their time in college. Our participants ended up being about 85% female, 87% white, and 45% queer. We had a total of 107 respondents that answered at least 50% of the questions that we thought the data was usable enough to include. As for our results, our first two hypotheses were not supported, and they were also not reported as significant. However, our post hoc hypothesis was supported, and the data was also found significant for that. That hypothesis measured self-reported success rates for romantic relationships, and that evidence supported the idea that queer relationships are reported to be less successful than heterosexual relationships within college students. So the constructs we used for this research include sexuality and media representation. Both of these are independent variables, sexuality being sexual orientation that included options such as heterosexual, bisexual, gay, lesbian, unsure, and people who preferred not to answer. So we predicted that sexuality would determine romantic maturity and emotional intelligence. And this would also depend on the amount of media they consume that contains either heterosexual relationships or queer relationships. Our other two constructs were the dependent variables, being emotional intelligence and romantic maturity. Both of these were measured pretty similarly. Examples included people with higher levels of emotional intelligence were shown to have more control of their emotions, their actions, and their thoughts, and just how they communicated with others. Similarly, romantic maturity was measured with responses to how they acted within relationships. So one of our open-ended questions gauged what they were to do in a conflict with their romantic partner. So depending on these answers is how we measured romantic maturity. Again, people with higher levels of romantic maturity were determined to have better control over their emotions, more confident in their self-image, and overall just be able to handle stress and anger in a more mature way.
So during the course of our research, we did run into a few limitations. These are things that if we were to repeat the experiment, we would do differently. So the first thing we would do better is develop our questions in a way that captured connections between our constructs better. So that would be taking more time to create our questions. The second limitation that we had is that we did not have a very long literature review. It was substantial enough, but we think that in the future we could do more research before doing this project. And then our last thing was that the demographics for our participants were not diverse at all. Like Kate said, they were mostly women and mostly white, so this could give us differences if we were to look at a more diverse background. For future research, these are things that we would look forward to expanding on this research project. So our first idea was to research people who are under the age of 18. We know that when people are under the age of 18, they can develop in different ways. So we want to see whether media representation affects students when they're differently or when they're younger. We also wanted to survey a wider audience, like I said before. And the third idea that we had was to ask questions that are more open-ended. We want to do this because sexuality can be hard to gauge, and people have a lot of unique experiences that can't always be answered with objective questions. Finally, when we were looking at the results of our survey, we came up with a lot of questions for further discussion. First of all, when looking at media representation in general, it didn't seem that it affected queer relationships that much. Now, we know that it certainly can, especially with cultivation theory, saying that if queer people see heterosexual messages repeated in media a lot, they might tend to reflect those, but that didn't seem to be the case, actually. It's also important to consider the age of the people that we surveyed. So these people were in our generation, and that's typically younger people. So we actually have a rising number of media representation. So maybe the representation for younger people is actually sufficient and wouldn't negatively affect queer people. Secondly, queer people did self-report lower numbers of success. Now, this could be because their success is based off of heteronormative standards in media. Queer people might be confusing, successful relationships for themselves when they should be looking at how unique it could be when they're looking at queer relationships in general.
Thank you for listening to our research.
So I am here with the freshly done presenters. How did it feel?
It felt really good. I think we did pretty well.
We rolled with it. It was great.
So Kate, you've also been seeing Kate's work all day. She is our department's intern and posting all our social media content for the entire year. So if you've seen any of that, you've seen Kate works all semester. So Kate, what was it like to get to watch other people present versus having to do it yourself?
I think it actually helped. I saw other people go through what I was about to go through. So being behind the scenes is kind of fun. It's what I like to do anyways.
Awesome. So let's continue on. We have Amber and Abby up next. So back to more research presentations.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amber Schmitt.
And I'm Abigail Cohen.
Thank you for joining us for our research presentation today. Our topic is Violent Media on Personal Perceptions of the World. Our research topic focuses on specifically violent media content and how it impacts a viewer's personal perception of the world. We decided to study this because there is a lack of studies regarding specifically violence in the media and the real-world effect. We use the cultivation theory by George Gettenberg in order to explain this phenomenon. This theory explains that the media creates a false reality that people believe in and how it affects their perceptions of the world. We had two hypotheses for our research project today. Our first hypothesis is that women perceive the world as more violent due to the media they consume in comparison to their male counterparts. Our second hypothesis is that people do not experience as much violence as the real world as what they see in the media. For our procedures for this project, we conducted a survey on Qualitrix. Our survey took approximately 3 minutes to complete and had a total of 14 questions. An example of a question asked on our survey is, how violent do you perceive the world, with participants differentiating between their day-to-day lives and the world as a whole. Another question that we asked was to please estimate how long participants were spending on media every day within a 24-hour time period. For our participants, we had 115 total fill out our survey. After cleanup of the data, we had 106 participants that we were able to run data analysis on. We had an overwhelming majority of female participants, and uniquely enough, we actually had 3% of third gender or non-binary participants in our survey.
Our results are as follows. Our hypothesis 1 and 2 were on the last slide, and we did those completing t-tests. They were unfortunately not significant. And for our post-hypothesis, we asked the question, people of color have more media influence than white people. When given the open-ended question, how does the media influence how you think about the real world? We did that as a chi test, and again, it was not significant.
For this research, we used four different constructs, The first construct is media perception. There was a study already done that there was a real and significant correlation between media violence and real reported media. Our study was based off of this predetermined connection supporting our topic. From our research, we were able to see that there was a connection between violent media content and the real-world perception of the world. Our second construct is gender, saying that when women are victimized more in comparison to their male counterparts, according to an FBI statistic. What this means for our media is that, for our research, is that the media shows women as victims disproportionately to their male counterparts. From this research, we proved that women do not view the world as more violent in their compared to their male counterparts. In fact, by a very small margin, men actually view the world as more violent.
For our third construct, we looked at violent media content. So we basically found in studies that people are choosing to create their own violent media content and then adding to that what is available. In our study, we asked the question, how acceptable do you think that media violence is? And we created a Likert scale from 1 to 7. 4 people found it totally unacceptable, whereas 3 found it perfectly acceptable. Our fourth and final construct was true crime. We asked the question, how frequently do you think the media reports the following of true crime? Whereas 45 people in our survey thought it was very frequent. We also found studies about suicide, boxers, and the rise of infantilization of serial killers.
So we had some limitations for our research. Our first limitation is a lack of background. So there was not a lot of studies done relating to the exact perception of media violence on the real world. So we really were struggling to find citations and articles that we could use to support our research in the beginning. Our second limitation was an error in the survey. Originally, we missed the ages 26 and 27 in our demographic questions. This mistake was identified within the first day of our survey being open and was fixed very quickly afterwards. Our third limitation was a lack of diversity. We had a mostly Caucasian population fill out our survey, with people self-identifying as Caucasian as our participants 86.69% of the time. We would have really liked to have been able to have captured a more diverse population, including people of color.
For future research, we came up with 3 ideas. The very first one is to look at specific careers. For our survey, we actually interviewed emergency managers, and if you don't know, they basically live in a world of chaos and real world violence, which led to some very interesting survey options that we learned. The second idea was, again, we wish that we had surveyed more diverse groups of people, because as she had previously stated, we had 92 white people and 14 people of color take our survey. And our third and final idea was picking a specific type of media to explore, so YouTube or TikTok. Finally, the things that we learned of our study were that from the effects of media, we have found a very significant connection between violent media consumption and real-world perception. Experience versus media. Most participants identify to have experienced real-world violence, but believe the real world is more violent than their day-to-day lives. That was over 40% of our research study. And finally, to sum this up, we have the perfect quote from our survey. It was, It makes it seem a lot more dangerous than it is, but it also serves as a reminder to be careful and stay alert. Thank you for listening to our study.
Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for tuning in with us.
I'm Annabelle Jennings.
And this is our study of self-presentation and the publicity of media. So Annabelle and I were interested in how one changes the presentation of themselves based on the publicity of their own content, whether that was public, semi-public, or private content. We were also interested in how social media usage, posting preferences, and how users value feedback affected self-presentation and the publicity of media. We did not find many studies that examined how one changes oneself based on who their content is shared with and the differences between public, semi-public, and private content. We found studies that examined self-presentation and its relation to self-esteem and a user's need for socialization, but none that studied how publicity of content correlated with it. The theory we used was Charles Cooley's Looking Glass Self from 1902, and this theory explains how an individual's identity or self-image is based on the perception of others. We twisted this theory to examine how likely a user is to change their identity based on their screen time, publicity of content, value of feedback, and posting preferences. There's two of our hypotheses there. Our H2 studied self-presentation and posting preferences, while our post hoc H1 examined publicity of media, posting preferences, and social media usage.
A little bit about our methodology. For this study, we were looking for participants above the age of 18. There was a total of 116 participants, but after reviewing the data, we only accepted 107. Out of those responses, there was 76% female, 22% male, and 3% non-binary. For our procedure, we conducted an online survey with 17 sample questions about participants' usage of social media and one open-ended question asking why people post content. In H1, we found that more people spend a longer time on social media when sharing content publicly. H2 and H3 had no significance. And as Jacob just said, our post-hoc analysis predicted that people with a higher average daily screen time are more likely to post videos semi-publicly.
Here's a couple of our constructs. Our first one was self-presentation, and for the purposes of this study, we defined that as how one presents themselves or changes themselves on social media. We found that respondents do slightly change how they present themselves when posting fully public content, and this practice has led to difficulty when trying to differentiate between one's virtual self and one's real self, which makes it harder to know when a creator or a friend on social media is being genuine. For social media usage, we were interested in how a user's social media usage and screen time would correlate with a couple of our other constructs. We found that users will spend a longer time when sharing content publicly, like Annabelle said, perhaps to monitor likes, comments, and/or their feed. We've also found that those with higher screen times, like Annabelle mentioned, are more likely to post content publicly. This may seem like a basic distinction, but due to some social media users being heavy consumers rather than creators, we wanted to analyze that relationship.
Our third construct is public versus private media, which is the distinction between public and private content helps us to understand how users shape their online identities and interact with others on social media. From the data, it shows that people post more public content than private content, and public content represents the intentional self-image individuals project to their audience, versus private content is more of a closer-knit circle of people that you trust more. For our fourth construct, uses and gratifications theory, this theory helps to understand why respondents use social media and what they get out of it. We predicted that people post content publicly to receive positive feedback from their peers. However, this correlation was not significant.
We did come across a couple limitations within the study. Our first one was our survey construction. We should have asked our respondents more questions about their preference of posting videos versus photos, and we instead had to infer that data based on the data that they received or gave us about the likeliness of their posting and their posting habits. We also should have asked more questions relating to self-presentation. This, which leads me to our second limitation, which was how to analyze our data based on the construct of self-presentation. We had a really hard time drafting questions for this construct and also had a hard time interpreting what some respondents meant in their data. Instead, we should have asked more open-ended questions for this construct, and a more qualitative approach would have been more appropriate. Lastly, our third limitation was how our constructs relate. We have many different constructs going on here, and while they are relatable, they are not super specific. We should have incorporated use and gratifications theory more into our survey questions. Instead, we asked how feedback is valued, but not how it affects a user's self-presentation. Trying to find relationships between so many constructs, subconstructs, and variables was a challenge.
For future research, our first idea was, like Jacob said, to do a more qualitative approach and ask more open-ended questions. For our second idea, we talked about peer influence on self-presentation, where we can examine how cultural norms and societal expectations shape the way people present themselves online, which will focus on the differences across various demographics. Our final idea was to conduct a more longitudinal study on self-presentation, and we would focus more on younger participants with this. But we can conduct the longitudinal research to track changes in self-presentation behaviors over time, analyzing how they adapt in response to technological advancements and cultural movements.
And so here are our two key findings. Observation 1, we found that users with higher social media users with higher social media usage are the users creating and posting the most content. We also found that these high usage users are somewhat likely to change their presentation. While this finding seems like a basic discovery, we wanted to distinguish in the sample whether consumers or creators had the higher social media usage. After the study and the sample, we have confirmed that creators do. This practice of changing how a user presents themselves can lead to harmful effects for consumers. While the study's respondents are just barely likely to participate in changing their self-presentation, users that identify as influencers or very high users of social media may be more likely to engage in this behavior. As for our second finding, we discovered that users on social media are not posting to receive positive feedback from followers like we thought. This finding was interesting because we expected at least some users to be posting to receive feedback, positive or negative. While positive feedback is valued from users, it is not a reasoning for users to post. Instead, many users are posting for themselves and still like to receive feedback, positive or negative, and that might relate to their self-presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and tune in for the rest of our broadcast.
Yes, thank you.
Presentation. What happened?
I just transformed over here, teleported, whatever you want to call it. Yep. Just
So why don't you tell us why we did pre-record your presentation here?
Yeah, so unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but my partner Annabelle Jennings is currently at, where are they playing?
Charleston, South Carolina, I believe.
Charleston, South Carolina, and they were playing match play for the Big South Women's Golf Championship. She did well today. She won her match play, so we are rooting her on from afar.
Yes, so I think Annabelle's another round today, so go get him again. So what was it like to record your presentation as opposed to doing it live like everyone else?
Yes, we definitely had the advantage of being able to do a second take. Anyone that gives a presentation knows it's kind of a one and done, but we did end up recording a couple different ones and picked out the best. So we definitely had that advantage. I will say it was a quick turnaround from gathering our results to like forming them into our discussion. So that was probably the biggest challenge, but I'll take that over giving a live presentation.
Well, awesome. We're glad we still got to hear your research here. So we are back to live presentations right here. Stay tuned.
Hello, my name is Maya Anderson, and this is my research partner, Garen Kroll, and we are presenting our research on how social media influences working out. So a little bit about our research. Our research studies how individuals are influenced by fitness influencers and how this affects their self-esteem and motivation levels. Other research studies individuals' body perception and their motivation. However, our research examines how fitness influencers on social media influence individuals' motivations to work out. The theory that we used was social comparison theory. This theory allowed us to compare between fitness influencer and fitness influencee. And our hypotheses are as follows on the screen. Moving on to procedures, we did a Qualtrics survey, which was with a 5-minute, it took 5 minutes to complete the survey with approximately 23 questions. And our questions are as follows on the screen. Overall, we had 66 highly media-oriented women who were in their lower 20s. And our research are as follows, with an H1 as non-significant, an H2 non-significant, and an HH1 with significance. Moving on to our first construct, which is comparison orientation. And as presented in H2, participants' engagement in social media has no correlation with comparing themselves to fitness influencers. Moving on to construct 2. This is how easily individuals were influenced. And as presented in H1, fitness content doesn't influence an individual to work out. Now moving on to construct 3. This is influence on self-esteem. As presented in H2, social media has no impact on our participants' self-esteem.
For our fourth construct, we did influence on body image. It was not proven that college students are influenced by the content that they consume on social media. For our limitations, the first limitation that we faced was how we collected data. Us collecting data, we didn't have as many respondents as we had initially wanted. And we also, that goes as well with our second one for our sample size, did not give us enough of what we wanted, and because we were only surveying women, it was also proven to be more difficult. And then the third limitation that we faced was self-reported data. This was difficult because this was an unsupervised survey, so individuals were free to respond as they wanted to, which left us with some biased answers and probably not 100% truthful answers. Our ideas for future research, the comparative analysis of social media platforms and workout motivation. This would compare different platforms to one another as opposed to an overall comparison. Our second idea is investigating the role of virtual communities in exercise adherence. This would deeper explore niche groups and how that would impact exercise motivation on its own. And then our third idea is exploring the role of social media algorithms in exercise motivation and how these algorithms shape the content that you are exposed to and how that shapes exercise motivation. Our research study did not show any significant relationship between social media and working out specifically, though we still did see a correlation between social media and self-esteem and body image, and a correlation between how easily an individual is influenced by social media and body image and self-esteem. Thank you very much. Okay. You know, we're
is Claudia Wellman, and my research is on the impact of parasocial relationships upon happiness. So my research topic is about the parasocial relationships, and what exactly a parasocial relationship is when one party develops a closeness to another and the feelings are not typically reciprocated because they have never met. So an example of this that I like to think of is like Taylor Swift fans, and she doesn't know who they are, she just knows that she has fans, and so that is an example of a parasocial relationship. There's a research gap with media consumption seemingly increasing within the age that we're in right now, and a lack of research on parasocial relationships and the risk on consumer happiness. And the theory that I used within my research was the social identity theory. The social identity theory suggests that an identity of self is influenced by their identity in a group, and that identity has greater influence when there is a feeling of a strong emotional tie to a group. This can be applied to parasocial relationships and connect to the assumption that similar identities in relationships can increase influence on the media consumer. So for my hypothesis, my first one was that individuals that are part of a fandom group will have higher levels of happiness than those who are not a part of a fandom group. And then my second hypothesis was that females are more likely to be impacted by parasocial relationships than men. And then my third was that individuals that spend less than 5 hours a week on social media are less likely to be influenced by parasocial relationships. And so my questions within my that was sent out were multiple choice and Likert scale questions, and they measured happiness, likelihood of interacting with a celebrity, media usage, and then also their demographics. And so my procedure was through a survey, and I sent the survey out on social media through Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and then also various group chats. And the people who took the survey were required to be 18 years and older, and the average length was 2 minutes long. My final participants were 124 people that I took the results from. The rest of it was removed because I felt as though, because they had not filled out the questions fully, that it wouldn't be beneficial to the research. And 82% of the participants were women, 82% were white, and 90% of the participants were 18 to 24 years old. And then the most amount of time that they spent on social media was through TikTok. And so within my results for hypothesis 1, with the fan group having higher levels of happiness, that was found to be not significant. And my second hypothesis, where females are more likely to be impacted by parasocial relationships, that was found to be significant. And then my last was found to be not significant. And so my constructs that I used were, the first one was fan levels in parasocial relationships. The construct to gain understanding on a level of interest in celebrities and influencers, and the amount of involvement within fan groups was looked at throughout my research. And this was measured through H2 DV questions, asking if they talk about the celebrity, if they interact with them, and if they would buy their products. And H1 found that people who are part of this fandom group have higher levels of happiness than those who are not a part of one. My second construct was gender and parasocial relationships, that women, based off other research, women tend to find themselves similar to an influencer that is the same gender as them. So within my study, results of independent sample t-tests showed that women are more likely to be impacted than men. And then third construct was level of happiness. Prediction from other findings in research was found that levels of happiness in fandoms individually versus group fandoms. And so within my research, with an independent sample t-test, my data shows that those who are not in a fan group do not experience this impact on happiness. And then my final construct was time into media consumption, and people who spent more than 5 hours a week on social media are more likely to be impacted by parasocial relationships. Some limitations: the first one was an unbalanced sample size. The third one was definition of fan group. I don't think that it was fully defined as it should have been. And the third was that people may not put value into a fan group, they just might not care, and to send the survey to a physical group of fans instead. And for future research, I'd like to conduct research on adolescents and see if there's a difference in parasocial relationships of adolescents versus people who are 18 and up. Second is to create focus groups, access to media versus no media, and see if there's a difference within that, and make data more accurate, precise, and have more control. And my third is to study select groups that follow different celebrities to see if there's a difference upon different celebrities and parasocial relationships. The majority of participants consume media because it is entertaining and or because they have interest in the person's lifestyle. And it would be interesting to see if what lifestyles people are interested in based off economic status, genders, and ages. And then finally, this research shows that females are more impacted by parasocial relationships than men due to the t-test. And it would be interesting in further research to figure out why this is and what causes men to have a difference on impact. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayana Calvin, and today I'll be presenting my communication research on social media and the effects on African Americans. So to start, my research focuses on social media and its impact on people of color, and specifically the African American community. For my research, I found that there was a lack of research that confirmed that social media was the direct cause of why a lot of people of color have been having an impact on their well-being, and so I figured I should do some research on it. The communication theories I used were cultivation theory, which explains how people are heavily impacted by media through mass exposure. And my other theory was that media dependency theory, which explains how people who have used a specific type of media for majority of time are more dependent on that type of media. And I have two hypotheses. My first hypothesis is people of color are more prone to developing racial trauma through social media other than real life experiences. And my second hypothesis is that people who are exposed to social media at an earlier age are more likely to have lower levels of self-perception than people who started later or did not start social media at all. So for my research, I decided to conduct a survey, and within that survey was 20 questions that took about 3 to 5 minutes to complete. And within the survey, I asked questions like, what's your social media use and its effects on the mental well-being? For my participants, I decided to do college-age students, which were 18 to 24 years of age, and the final number of people or participants that I had for my survey was 77 people. As a result, I found that my first hypothesis was non-significant, and my post hoc hypothesis, which explained how females are more prone to have more mental health issues than people who do not identify as female. And that was non-significant as well, with my H2 approaching significance since it is close to the value of the recommended p-value. For social media, the construct explained how the social media usage and how people use it and how it applies to their well-being. And for this question, I ended up doing an open-ended question, which explained how people experience social media or how they feel about it using mental, emotional, or physical well-being scale. And a lot of the responses were both positive and negative, but majority of the responses said that they really don't take too many things seriously, as I stated on my PowerPoint. As far as adolescence, this explained how the age of people and when they were exposed to social media, and it changes how they see themselves or shape their viewpoint of social media. And for this question as well, I used an open-ended question where I asked them what age they started their first social media account. And for this question, a lot of the people ranged from 10 to 12 years. Most people were earlier. But with this question, I also correlated to also the social media open response question. And I found a few patterns and found that people who were on social media at an earlier age did have a few negative aspects or viewpoints and things that they had wrong with social media, but a majority of them just didn't have an impact at all. As far as self-perception, this was the way that individuals see or view themselves based on the interactions and experiences throughout the use of social media. And for this question, I had a question on my survey that said, my social media presence makes me feel good about myself. And for this, I found that 42% of people stated that they neither agreed or disagreed with this statement, which I took as their self-perception does have some type of effect, but not as much of an effect. And for racial trauma, I found that there was 26% of people who disagreed with this question, that they feel criticized on social media because of their race and ethnicity. So I found that race and ethnicity doesn't really matter or have a very distinct correlation when it came to whether or not they have a negative impact or positive impact. As far as my limitations, I found that a bunch of my questions were not as clear as I hoped they would be, and so I feel like that would be a better way for me to improve my research. My sample size was female dominated, so that was a variation of not having enough males to get a good reading for my results. And for my responses, many of the responses were deleted due to the irrelevance or inconsistency. And for future research, I feel that I could do a older generation where the survey could be a little different based on their perspective. And then as far as survey questions, I feel like if I had qualitative data, I would have a very different read of how my results would come out. And for survey recruitment, I feel that if I focus on one particular platform, then I can see that there's a difference. And for my takeaways, I said that my first takeaway, I said that social media and its effect on people versus color who are not, there's a much difference to see how it affects the group because each of the differences are similar in a way, or they take it in a similar way. For my takeaway 2, social media plays a key role in how we perceive ourselves no matter what age we're exposed to it. And for my last takeaway, I found that men and women are both experiencing mental health problems, but women are more expressive of it than males. And that's all for my research. I hope you have a great day.
Hello, my name is Tommy Portella, and today I'm going to be talking about the research that I've done about the attention span effects on young adults through social media. So my topic is about how social media affects the attention span of people from the ages of 18 to 25. To find out, the research gap that I wanted to find out is if the emergence of social media over the past 2 decades and the rampant increase in technology has effectively shortened attention spans in people. The theory that I used was the uses and gratification theory, which essentially just talks about what media that people consume and for the reasons that they use it. The hypotheses that I used for this project, the first one is that people who spend more time on social media will have a shorter attention span than the people who spend less time on social media. The second one is that college-age females will have a shorter attention span than college-age males. My post hoc hypothesis after my research was that attention spans will be worse if people are more distracted by their phones rather than anything else. So for my methodology, some procedures that I used was a convenience sample survey. The average length for each survey was only about 3 minutes. I asked 15 questions for those. Some sample questions that I used were, how many hours on average do you spend on social media per day? Do you get distracted by your phone while doing homework or eating dinner or watching a movie? Some participant numbers. The final number I had of responses were 58. The demographic highlights, I had 31 males and 26 females. One preferred not to say, so it's a pretty even split between genders. The average age was just under 21 years old. My results for hypothesis 1 showed a significant correlation. The p-value was under 0.0001. There was a significant difference because social media usage directly affected the attention spans. The more social media usage, the worse the attention span. The second hypothesis was not a significant difference, the p-value at 0.11. College-age females and males both use technology a lot, so there wasn't really a difference between the genders that were used. For my post hoc hypothesis was also not significant. It was, again, very close at 0.08, but otherwise there was a difference. There wasn't a big difference between people who getting distracted by their phones as opposed to anything else that they get distracted to. The constructs that I used, the first one was attention span. It was part of my dependent variable for hypotheses 1 and 2. It was significantly different for people depending on their social media usage, but it wasn't significant based off of the gender, which brings me to my second construct. Gender was the independent variable for my second hypothesis. The gender had no significant difference for people depending on their social media usage. The third was the social media usage, which was the independent variable for my first hypothesis. It had a significant difference on the attention span. The more that people use social media, the worse attention span got. And my last construct was age, which was a part of my independent variable for my second hypothesis. The age did not have a significant difference on attention span. The limitations that I had to this project, the first one was that I only had 58 total useful responses, so more responses would have given me a better sample. I could have done a better job at promoting the survey and getting it out to more people in that age group to get more responses. The second limitation was that I should have added a question about total screen time that people have on their phones. I had one about how much time they spend on social media, but one that would have talked about how much screen time, not only on their phone, but on other devices like their laptop or tablet or television, would have gotten a better number of how much media people are really consuming. And my third limitation was that I should have added more emphasis on connecting the research to my theory. It would have been interesting to find out why people are using social media as the go-to to satisfy their needs. So for future research, my first idea is to use for all age groups to see the difference in particular generations. I think it'd be interesting to see if you had a study of children, people in their 40s, people in their 60s, just to see if it changes generation to generation. The second idea is to see if there is an alternative that could maybe test if attention spans were actually getting better. Even though social media usage is making it worse, maybe there's something about social media or some other aspect of media in general that's actually improving these attention spans. And my third idea is to try to use the research to attempt to make social media more educational and more productive. I think if social media outlets had more educational benefits, then they would help people stay zoned in and not get distracted as easily. My big takeaways from this, the first one is that attention spans are getting worse, especially the more people use social media. So as technology and all these social medias are advancing, people are getting worse and worse attention spans, and it's only going to get worse the more that technology expands. Another big takeaway is that people are letting all types of media consume their lives, even if it hurts other aspects such as social skills or mental health. Some of that was hurt during the COVID pandemic, but since then, they've kind of used social media as a scapegoat, and it's continued to hurt these social skills and mental health. I would love to continue to work with this research. It was great to look over and use this, and thank you so much for listening.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Robertson, and today I'm going to share my project entitled The Relationships Between Content Engagement and Consumption on TikTok on LGBTQ+ Identities. The question that guided my research was, does TikTok influence questioning people's perception of their gender identity? There's currently little to no research about queer identities or their use of social media platforms, especially TikTok, so I wanted to explore if TikTok impacts questioning or queer people. My study utilizes Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory, which refers to the ways in which people create beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors by observing and making meaning of events around them. This communication theory is relevant because it will help explain how content that people are exposed to on TikTok influences their various identities. For my preliminary research, I wrote two hypotheses. First, the more LGBTQ+ content people consume, the more likely they are to question their gender identity. Second, queer people are more likely to engage with LGBTQ+ content on their TikTok For You pages than non-questioning people. To conduct my research, I used an online survey that asked questions about average time spent using TikTok, engagement with LGBTQ+ content, and influences to understanding one's gender identity. 138 people participated in my survey, and a majority of them were cisgender women. From the data I collected, I determined that H1 is not significant, but H2 is significant. According to Hearn 2022, TikTok utilizes an algorithm that tracks what viewers post, like, comment, and who they follow to best curate their For You pages. Simpson et al. 2022 found that TikTok often tries to influence people's values and perception of the world throughout its algorithm and what it populates, what videos populates the For You page. Participants reported 11 main themes of content found on their For You pages, including funny videos, videos by queer creators, political content, and others. Oh, and I forgot to change it. After interpreting the data, I created a post hoc hypothesis that compares light and heavy TikTok users. The hypothesis is people who are considered light TikTok users, so 0 to 2 hours, are less likely to see LGBTQ+ content on their For You pages than heavy users, which are 3 or more hours. And that ended up being significant. According to Bronsky and Shavat 2019, gender identity is how someone perceives themselves within the spectrum of gender. Moreover, queer is used as an umbrella term for anyone who does not fit into the mainstream rules about sexuality or gender. Queer people use social media for a variety of reasons, including to educate themselves on unfamiliar topics or to find a community of like-minded people. Additionally, according to Craig and McEnroy 2014, social media platforms give queer people, and I quote, the ability to safely figure out their identities in an online platform before expressing themselves offline, end quote. During my study, I explored whether TikTok influenced people's understanding of their own gender identities, and I discovered on the whole it does not. However, some participants cited that social media has influenced their perception of their gender identities. Some other influences include nothing, family, friends, biology, society, environment, and others. For the purpose of this study, LGBTQ+ content includes any content on TikTok that is created by a queer person or discusses queerness. This can include videos about queer political issues, mental health resources, and explanations of queer identities. Participants who reported that they see queer content on their For You page ranked content made by LGBTQ+ creators as the most common kind of LGBTQ+ content on their For You pages, with political issues impacting the LGBTQ+ community as second most common. According to Lynn 2023, the primary age demographic for TikTok users are 18 to 24-year-olds. The average age for people who participated in my study was 21 years old. I had the intention of exploring young people versus older people's survey answers, but I did not receive enough variations of age to do so. There were several limitations to my study, unfortunately. The first one is that there were a lack of non-cisgender participants. The second one is that there were a lack of non-heterosexual participants. And lastly, I did not define gender in my survey, which is commonly confused with sex. To build upon this research, though, in the future, I would like to study the causes, whether TikTok causes people to question their sexual orientation, and how queer people use social media beyond TikTok. So what? With my study, I wanted to contribute to public understanding of the queer community to hopefully reduce the stigma and stereotypes surrounding queer people. Many people believe that queer people choose to be queer, which is false. Additionally, not a lot of people understand that sex and gender are different, which has an impact on the community as a whole. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you watching.
Hi, I'm Eliza Barker. And I'm Kennedy Giroux. And our study is on sleeping patterns within college-age students. So our research topic is how does the use of active social media affect the sleeping patterns within college-age students? Our research gap is between active social media and sleep within college students. The theories used are the uses and gratification theory. This theory examines why people use social media to satisfy their specific needs. Our hypotheses are the more college-age students use social media, it will affect their sleeping patterns negatively. The more people who average less sleep at night will average higher levels of anxiety.
So our methodology, our procedure was a survey that took between 2 and 3 minutes, and some sample questions we had were, how much time do you actively spend on social media, and do you think the quality of sleep affects your anxiety? Our participants, we had 100, and our demographics were college-age students between 18 and 25. We ended up with 72% female, 26% male, and 3% non-binary or third gender. And our results showed that all of our hypotheses were significant.
So our first construct is sleep. We looked at the correlation between active social media and sleep. It is recommended that a person gets 8 hours of sleep each night. An example survey question was about how many hours of sleep do you get each night? It was reported that most participants get 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Our second construct was active social media. We looked at how the use of active social media affects sleeping patterns and sleep. We did this by looking at different social media platforms. An example survey question was, what social media platforms do you use before going to bed? Instagram was reported the most used social media platform before going to bed. We also asked, why do you use social media before bed? Common themes found were entertainment, boredom, relaxation, winding down, and communication. The most common theme was winding down.
Our third construct was college-age students, and for this we chose a demographic of people between age 18 and 25. And an example question is, how do you describe yourself? And most participants responded female. And our fourth and final construct is mental health, and for this we focused mainly on anxiety. So we looked at how anxiety played a role between the participants and their sleeping patterns. And an example question from the survey was, do you think the quality of sleep affects your anxiety? And we ended up with most participants responding sometimes and often.
So our first limitation is that we need to ask more questions about anxiety. Our second limitation is that most people did not finish the survey. Initially, we had 118 responses, but we had to eliminate those because people did not finish the survey. Our third limitation is that we needed more open-ended questions.
So for future research, our first idea was to look at the sleeping patterns within a different demographic. For this, we were thinking about possibly middle school kids. And our second idea is to focus more on mental health. So we were thinking about expanding into depression instead of just anxiety like we did for this. And our last idea is to include more information on social media platforms. So for this, we would want to look further into why do people use Instagram the most before bed.
So the results of our study were that active social media usage before bed does affect the sleeping patterns within college-age students. It was also found that the use of active social media before bed caused more anxiety in those participants than those who do not use active social media before bed. This concludes our study. Thank you so much for listening.
Hello, my name is George Gaston.
And I'm Evan Woodall.
And we're presenting our research on the perceptions of regional dialects in Virginia. So our research topic, the perception of regional dialects in Virginia, is a study that examined the different regions of Virginia and how their dialects differ between region to region, as well as how Virginians perceive the dialects in those regions. Our research gap looked at two different articles, the effects of regional dialects on oral nasal balance and nasality perception, as well as regional dialect perception across the lifespan, identification and discrimination. We had two research questions. First was, how do regional dialects differ across Virginia? And second, what are the perceptions of regional dialects in Virginia?
And so for our methodology, we selected participants that came from Virginia and attend this institution. Recruitment procedures included social media, word of mouth, and snowball recruiting. Procedures included 12 interviews. The average length of these interviews were 16 minutes, and data was transcribed via otter.ai. We conducted a thematic analysis that looked at keywords, repetition, and uncertainty.
So for our results, we found 4 different themes throughout the study. The first was southernness, which we described as how a southern dialect relates to intelligence, demeanor of speech, what the absence of a southern dialect means, as well as what political undertones exist within a southern dialect. An example from one of our interviewees was, I think the number one thing is stereotypes of, quote, we're not that bright. Secondly was regionality, which we defined as how interviewees separated Virginia into different regions and what themes those different regions brought up. An example of this was, quote, my perception of Nova is very fast dialect defined in their letters.
Third, we have familiarity. Interviewees spoke more on the regions they knew the most amount of people from. An example quote would be, based on how fast we speak, how we go quickly into an introduction as well. And last, we have uncertainty, where interviewees found difficulty throughout a few areas of the process. An example quote would be, I don't know, it's hard for me to come up with an example off the top of my head.
So for our results for our 2 research questions, firstly, we found that interviewees had difficulty putting into words how dialects differ across Virginia, but everyone agreed that the state has a very diverse set of regional dialects, so they just had difficulty putting into words what those differences were. For our second research question, the perceptions of dialects differed from person to person, but many perceived a southern dialect to be associated with either a lower intelligence or the lack thereof, and to be associated with a higher intelligence.
So participants discussed 2 main different findings. First, southernness equals low intelligence, whereas urbanity equals rude and snobby. These are consistent stereotypes associated with the 2 main regions of Virginia, and these perceptions are often based off of personal experiences with people from those regions. Second, we have subjects who are uncertain about how dialects differ throughout Virginia. This suggests that Virginia's dialects are similar to one another, actually, and people don't often notice broader dialects in their part of the country.
So moving on to limitations now. We found 3 limitations. Firstly, we had a very small sample size of only 12 participants, so to get a more comprehensive understanding of this, we would need more people to be involved in the study. Secondly, we've had a bit of a limited reach. Participants did not cover a huge geographic area. We needed both more people as well as people from other regions, such as the Appalachian Mountains. And finally, we needed more diversity. 91% of our participants were white, 66% were female, 25% male, and 8% were non-binary.
And finally, we suggest that future research on this subject consider the following 3 questions. 1, do college towns have a unique dialect that differs from the region that they're in? Second is, will increased media consumption lead to less variations in dialect in the future? And finally, how does Virginia's unique history combined with a mix of urban and rural populations influence the way that dialects develop? This concludes our presentation, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you for sticking with us. That was a lot of fun live senior original research presentations. Thanks for sticking with us, especially those couple of technical presentations. Hope you got to enjoy. We are incredibly proud of our students, of course, the ones in front of the camera and also the ones behind the camera. Where did everything go? They have made fast, remarkable work of our teardown. So we thank you for joining us. Make sure to tune in next year.
We'll see you again next year, and always remember, rush calm.